I was forwarded a question by Mike Boyle by a strength coach or trainer who is getting some great results with the toe touch progression little drill that I published in the book Athletic Body and Balance. And he said that there was no explanation of why it works in the book Athletic Body and Balance. And so instead of write a long detailed dissertation, I thought I would answer it in an audio format. I think I can articulate it a little bit more efficiently this way. Number one, a lot of us get really blown away by explanations. And my whole thing is when something works, we sometimes have to have it explained before we can really digest that. And I think the answer is stop thinking anatomy and start thinking pattern. The toe touch progression allows you to simply break a pattern. Somebody's body and brain don't really connect in the forward bending pattern. And doing the toe touch progression allows you to sort of scratch that old software and break through using some mobility and stability techniques. Now, people have seen me do this on stage. We'll find somebody in the audience that hasn't touched their toes in quite a long time, and we'll make them touch their toes very quickly simply by doing the drill in Athletic Body and Balance. I didn't go into an explanation in Athletic Body and Balance because the book was not written to professionals. My publisher actually told me write the book directly to the athlete. So in all appropriateness, no detailed medical explanation was given as to why it works in Athletic Body and Balance, and that's why it's not in there, not because I don't think I know the answer. We do it on stage, and I must say that that is somewhat inappropriate. That's me basically doing a quick trick to demonstrate if all you're thinking is anatomy, you'll never change a pattern like the toe touch that's limited for multiple reasons. And I started doing that trick simply as a statement back to some other people in the profession who were making corrective strategies quite a bit more involved than they need to be. They were over-dissecting problems and micromanaging every little minute mechanical, muscular detail of a pattern and losing the point that, hey, if your central nervous system doesn't get it, you can do all the corrective, isolated strategy you want and think it's going to get integrated, and it won't. You got to at some point address the pattern. And what I'm trying to demonstrate by doing that is in most cases, it's a pattern problem first. Now, first of all, if you can already touch your toes, let me take you through a quick example of what the person who can't feels like. Back up to the wall so both your heels and your buttocks are on the wall and try to bend forward and touch your toes, and you'll find very quickly that if you go for your toes, you'll wind up on your face. What I've done is taken away your ability to do a posterior weight shift, the thing that makes a deadlift good, the thing that makes forward bending uncomplicated. People who don't have that natural posterior weight shift of their hips, if you don't put weight behind your feet, you can't put weight in front of your feet. So if you want to feel what they feel like, you'll go and you say, well, they say their hamstrings are tight. Well, they're not tight. They're contracting to keep them from falling forward. So just listening to what somebody thinks is or is not tight in their body is not a really good diagnostic approach. So number one, the lack of a pattern. Number two, inappropriate weight shifting causes almost what we call a protective response that locks you out of the toe touch. Now, in the more involved movement screen that we do, the functional movement screen where we score it, we don't have a toe touch, but we have a thing called an active straight leg raise. If that is inappropriate, asymmetrical, or limited in some way, we first do the few small strategies that attack the active straight leg raise, just to get the core firing even in an unloaded position. If that doesn't normalize toe touching right away, we do the toe touch progression. And it goes like this. Heels are down and toes are up on like a 2x6 or a 2x4. We ask you to slightly bend your knees and place a foam roll or a rolled up towel or a small compressible ball between your knees, but your heels and toes must be touching. It puts you sort of in a bow-legged stance and renders it almost impossible for you to go into hyperextension of the knee. We want the knees flexed in an varus or bowed out position, but the feet must be touching at the heel and toe. From there we say, go down as far as you can. Your toes are up on a board, your heels on the ground. When you reach your first barrier, the first amount of tightness that you feel, crush or squeeze the ball between your knees. That activates your core because anything that makes your adductors fire will make basically your abs fire. And when we fire your adductors and your abs, we get reciprocal inhibition of your extensors of your hip and your extensors of your back. The external rotators and extensors of your hip and your extensors of your back. When those muscles relax, you quit fighting the movement. And since we've got your heels down and your toes up, we have thrown the weight behind your foot position. We forced you into a posterior weight shift without you even knowing it because we've got you standing uphill. The squeeze basically overrides your protective mechanism because you don't need it anymore. We cause the weight shift. And then some people just spontaneously touch their toes. Some people are still somewhat limited. If the people are still limited in the toe touch at that point, we say go ahead and cheat and bend your knees and just work through and break the pattern. Do 5 or 10 reps here. And let's repeat it the other way. We corrected one end of it, but now let's put your heels up and your toes down and have you doing the toe touch downhill. Now, a lot of people think, well, Gray, when you got the toes up, you're biasing and stretching the calf, and when you got the toes down, you're biasing and stretching the hamstring and low back because now they're essentially touching toes on a leg longer than they anatomically have. And if you want to take a simplistic approach, that's fine. We do bias that. But in our tubing program, we don't use a heel or a toe lift. We don't bias anything, and we use tubing to cause an anterior and posterior weight shift and get nearly the same result. So it's not as simplistic as stretching one muscle. And the minute we try to blame an entire faulty movement pattern on one muscle, we better have a diagnostic ability to say, hey, this muscle is pathological, meaning there's serious damage done to this muscle. Otherwise, you probably got inappropriate firing, poor stabilization, poor mobility, and a poor central nervous system pattern, riddled with some compensation. So doing the toe up, toe touch, and the heel up, toe touch pretty much causes weight shifting, reciprocal inhibition, and patterning. It makes you be less dependent on your legs to hold you up and more dependent on your core and your weight shifting to keep you balanced. So we find this pattern is out in some sedentary people who aren't active and some extremely active athletes who you wouldn't imagine would be limited there. And we also see this pattern out when a child goes through a growth spurt because the legs grow at a faster rate than the torso. So there's quite a few instances where we'll see this issue. The one thing I can tell you it indicates is people are dependent more on the legs for stabilization than on the core, and we don't want that. The forward bending pattern is such a primitive pattern that we ask in Athletic Body and Balance, if that's limited as well as your squat, always clean that up first. Because it's possible to not be able to touch your toes but be able to squat or be limited in both. But definitely the more primitive is the toe touch. In our video, the back side of the core, that's one of the first things we do because if you can't touch your toes and go straight into deadlifting, you're gonna basically stir up some problems. We can't even coach you into a good back position because you anatomically can't get the bar or bend over and get a kettlebell or dumbbell without rounding your back. Having said that, one of the big mistakes in corrective strategy is, all right, what do we do next? Now that we've got somebody touching their toes, do we just make them do this as their warm-up every day for the rest of their life? No. When you break through that pattern, you have a small window of opportunity. People want to know how long it lasts. 30 minutes, 40 minutes, I don't know. It depends on how quick you want to return to your habit. If I throw a bunch of stress on you, if I take somebody who does not have a good toe touch, and I restore their toe touch through doing some patterning of the active straight leg raise progression and the toe touch progression, I can have them go jump rope or do some heavy impact stuff, and they'll lose the effect much quicker than if they do slow, controlled movements first, because the system, if jarred, will reset back to its default, which is not too appropriate. So take the window of opportunity that you now developed a toe touch and maybe put a stick on their back so their spine will remain straight and erect, and rehearse some deadlifting mechanics. A simple way to do that is get somebody to step about a foot away from the wall and try to reach back as far as they can with their butt and just touch the wall, but don't lean on the wall. Really learn to do the posterior weight shift and start doing some deadlifting, either with a piece of tubing or a dumbbell. Deadlifting doesn't even have to be full range of motion. You can pull the weight off of a Reebok step in one arm and then the other, and you can advance that maybe to a single leg deadlift. Basically, if we reinsert that deadlifting pattern on a clean toe touch, you will quickly realize you don't need to do the toe touch progression as much. the need for that will diminish because now you're causing a reset. And I think just first of all, getting with somebody who knows how to appropriately do a deadlift is one of the first things you can do if you're not familiar with deadlifting. But we don't want to see people having to do corrective strategies or anything like that for a long period of time. And so the minute we break through, we try to upload new information that requires technique, mobility, stability, dynamic stabilization, appropriate breathing. I think a lot of people forget the breathing pattern that's so important to a heavy primal move like the deadlift. So I think there's some really neat stuff that can be done there. But the best way to answer the question, even though I've been wordy and all over the place, is the toe touch progression works because you challenge a pattern. And by challenging the pattern, you already go into the pattern knowing weight shifting is out, reciprocal inhibition is necessary. And one of the things that's becoming a sort of a vogue way to talk about some of these problems we see with movement patterns is you see very many sedentary people and highly trained athletes, they're using what we call global muscles, big muscles, prime movers, the muscles that bodybuilders work on, as stabilizers. And their local muscles, their deep muscles, their stabilizers aren't really doing the job. So when the multifidus muscles that stabilize the spine, the transverse abdominis is out, the hip rotators are out, the short adductors are out. Muscles around the core, the muscles in your feet and in the low part of your calves that balance you. When those muscles are out, you try to use your lats and glutes and quads and hamstrings to hold you up. And so it's not about stretching and strengthening, it's about changing the pattern, because if the pattern gets cleaner without having an intricate EMG device, you'll know you're doing the right thing. And that's why I rely so heavily on patterns changing to let me know I'm going in the right direction. So need to do some stretching, need to do some stick work. I wrote an article for Perform Better a while back on static stretching and poked some fun at Mike as I did it, but actually Mike was dead on talking about static stretching. So you got to do your mobility stuff, but when you're changing a pattern, that's exactly what you're doing. You're changing a pattern. There is no one specific anatomy that's being addressed or targeted any more than the other. If a muscle is tight, it's because you're using it that way. And if a muscle's weak, it's because you're using it that way. So this is me getting real wordy, and I guess you can see now why I wanted to respond in audio as opposed to typing. And I hope that helps. Athletic Body and Balance was written more to the consumer and more to the athletes than it was professional. So that's why the explanation is not very in-depth there. And the explanation that most athletes and clients go with is, hey, I just changed your pattern. It's no big deal. Let's move on to the next exercise. But once again, the reason that I do it in my lectures and workshops is a lot of people have made a lot more of corrective exercise than it is. They've tried to micromanage and almost make themselves seem a lot more intelligent or important than I think any of us are. Hey, you're just changing a pattern. You're tapping into a system that's much more intelligent than you, and roll with it. And don't just be enamored by what it accomplished. Turn around and build right on that. So I hope that helped, and thank you.